Hello guys, you're welcome once again to my channel, and in today's video we are going to be looking at the Slim framework. Alright, so the Slim framework is a very micro framework, and it has very minimalistic dependencies. It's a very wonderful framework if you're just starting out with, say, learning frameworks in PHP. Alright, and for this video we are going to be looking at the version 3 of the Slim framework. We are going to be using it in this video to build an API, and not just an API that has authentication, where you're able to create guests, you're able to read guests, update guests, and delete guests. But before you can perform any of these operations, you must have been authenticated. So we're going to be using Oauth2, we're going to be using JSON Web Token. Okay, so here is the Github Repo for this application. Not to worry, I'm also going to drop a link below this video so that you can just quickly get down to the repo and fork it if you like. All right, so one more thing I'd like to say is give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, like this video, share. That does me a whole lot of good. Okay guys, so now let's see the API in action. So I have my Postman here set up right now. What I can do is I'm going to go into PHP Storm, and right within my routes here, we have create guest. Okay, so I'm going to get right here and create guest and authorization for headers. I'm going to uncheck this right now. Let me just get rid of this now. And now if I try to create a guest, what do we get as our response? Oh, sorry. I think I started this server on port 8088, right? So let me just change that to 8088. Yep. And now if I click on send, so you can see it returns a 401 status code and success. You can see the header is 401, which is unauthorized. So because we are not authenticated yet, we have no access to this route. All right, so what I can do now is to be authenticated, I'm going to go to auth and login. The credential to authenticate me is going to be, right, this is the email. And the password is the password. Okay, so now if I go ahead and click on send, you can see we are now authenticated and our JWT token is generated here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to copy this token and I'm going to go into our headers and authorization. I'm going to get rid of this because this has pretty expired. And now I'm going to go to create guest. So if I try to create a guest here, you can see we have, I want to get this changed, the response. Yes, yeah. All right, so you can see now that we have success was false, response, name must not be empty, comments must not be empty. All right, so what I can do now is within the body, I can just change this. Okay, I think email is needed here and the name too. So let's just get Mario and the comments. Let's see, faster than the world, right? And now if I click on send, you can see we have success of true response, guest entry created successfully. Now if I were to say remove comments and click on send, you see comments must not be empty. So we can also view guest, right? So let me just get that route, view guest here. I'm going to change this right up here to view guest. So we can get that to be a get request and get, yep. And you can see now that we have all our guests, all the guests that we have created. All right. So you can see all the guests we have created basically. Also get single guest from the ID. So I'm going to call get single guest from the ID of 1. And that returns just the first guest, which is desmond@gmail.com. And then we have edit single guest, delete guest, and count the number of guests. So those are just the operations that we are basically going to be looking at. So basically, unless the user is authorized, unless the user is authenticated, he cannot access any of this. So now if I try to click on send, you can see here it's a 401. And if this token expires, all right, if his token expires, of course, it's also going to tell this user that his token is expired. Right now, it's telling us token not found. If it was an expiration token, the token was expired. It's also going to tell us that token has expired. Okay, guys, so now having done all this, what I'm going to do now is we're going to head straight into building this API with PHP Slim. All right, so now let me just get back to my Finder. And I'm going to create a new folder within my htdocs, my example. All right, so for this, I'm using exam server. So I'm going to create a new folder here. And our new folder is going to be called CRUD Slim App v3. And we already have an app Okay, we already have a name like that. So I'm going to call this v3 YouTube. All right. So this was the application I built. So let's just call this v3 YouTube. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to get in here. I am going to open. So I'm going to go into applications and then straight up to exam here, and now htdocs, and yep, here we are. And this window, of course. All right, so right now we have our brand new project, our empty folder. So the first thing I like to do is, of course, to head back over to our documentation for PHP Slim framework, and I want to go over to installation. So get started, and for installation, I'm going to composer require right in here. So I'm going to get my terminal. We're also going to install a couple of things too aside from the Slim framework. We are going to be installing Respect Validation. It's a PHP library that really makes validation straightforward. And we're also going to install Laravel's Eloquent, which we are going to use to query our database. All right, I find that a lot more cleaner than, say, PDO or writing your SQL queries yourself. All right, so now that we have this installed, I'm going to open this right now. And within our composer, the JSON file, you can see here that this is our Slim framework. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add the dependencies here. So we need our respect validation. And for respect validation, we would need version 2.0. And then also we are also going to make use of our Illuminate database, which is actually Laravel's Eloquent. And for this, we would need the latest version, which is at 7.1.2, oh, sorry, 7.12. And then we are also going to make use of PHP Slim's PSR7, and this is just going to help us with namespacing and all those cool stuff. For this, we are going to need version 1.1. And the last of them all is we are going to need a package to help us with our Oauth2 authentication. We're going to be using a JWT package, and the JWT package is called Tupola. So I'm going to call Tupola Slim JWT auth. And for this, we are going to need the latest version, which is 3.4. Next up is we are also going to need to set our auto loading, and for our auto loading, we are going to set everything to be responding to our app folder. All right, so I'm going to call our PSR4, and this is going to be for our app, a folder that we are going to create called app, and this is going to be within this folder. All right, and right now we are good to go. Tupola Slim, not a Slim, Tupola Slim. Yes, that should be it. And once we have successfully done this, we're going to come over to the terminal. And right at the terminal, we are going to run Composer update. And while we're waiting for Composer to do that for us, we are going to create a couple of folders here. So the first folder or the first directory I'm going to have here is going to be my app directory. And my app directory is where we are going to be doing a lot of auto loading from, basically for namespacing. And then we are also going to have a new folder here, or a new directory for our config. And this is where most of our configuration settings are going to come in. And then another new folder here too, called public. And our public is where our index.html, index.php file is going to exist alongside with our .ht access file. And next up is right within our public directory, I'm going to create a new file here. And this is going to be a .ht access file. And our .ht access file, we are going to just get over here. And I'm just going to copy this right now. Yep, so, oh, sorry, not this actually. This is within our public directory. Yes, our ht access within our public directory. This first set is going to help us with redirecting every request that comes directly to our index.php file. And this second one is going to help us with setting our headers, authorization headers, so that our application can be able to recognize the authorization headers that have been set and then do whatever it wants to do with them. So I'm going to copy this right now, and I'm going to get in here and just paste this. And within our root folder, we also need a htaccess file too. So I'm going to create a new file here, and I'm going to call this htaccess file. And I'm going to get back here, and I'm going to also copy this here. All right. And now that we have done this for our htaccess files, I'm going to close all this now. The next thing we are going to do is we're going to head into our config, and within our config, I'm going to create a new PHP file here. And this PHP file is going to be called bootstrap.php, and this is going to help with bootstrapping of our application. So within our bootstrap.php, I'm going to make use of our Slim app, all right? So our Slim app, and then I'm also going to autoload the PHP within our vendor file. or within our vendor folder. And sorry, it's actually vendor, yep. And this is autoload.php. And now that we have actually done this, what we can now do is I'm going to create a new instance of our Slim application, and then I'm going to run this guy. So if I just run this right now, and now within our index.php, I'm going to create, sorry, within our public folder, I'm going to create a new file here, and this is going to be our index.php. And within our index.php, I will require our bootstrap the PHP file. I'm going to go into our config and then I'll bootstrap the PHP. All right, so we are then going to save this right now. And what is all the error for? Okay, that's because we are missing this. All right, so now that we have actually required our bootstrap.php file, we are now going to set up a couple of things for our bootstrap.php file. And the first we're going to be looking at is going to be our error handling. And for our error handling, I'm going to create a new file in here. So I'm going to create a new PHP file, and I'm going to call this settings.php. All right, so within our settings.php, I'm going to return an array here. And our array is going to have our settings. And for our settings, we are going to have display error details. And this is just going to be responsible for displaying error details, basically displaying errors. If we don't set this as true, is every single error that comes in is going to just be a 500 request as an error. So we are also going to log our errors to our console. So this is going to be true. And log error details. Also log this to a file. All right, so log error details as true. And the last one is going to be determine our routes before app middleware. All right, right now we have done this. What we can now do is within our bootstrap, we are then going to require our settings here. So I'm going to require ones. And we are going to require our settings. So let me just settings.php. And for this, I'm going to assign this to a variable. So this is going to be settings. And let's not forget this right here. All right. So I'm going to then pass our settings into our Slim application. So basically by doing this, what we are basically telling our Slim application is we want you to display error details. If there is any error, please display the error. Log the errors if we actually want to log the errors, and determine routes before app middleware. Okay, so now back into our bootstrap.php. What I'm going to next do is I'm going to create an instance of the container of our application. And to do this, I'm going to call the container, and this is going to get the container instance. And now that we have created an instance of our container, the next thing we are going to look at is how we are going to handle specific type of errors. Like say if it was a 404 error, say maybe if the route was missing, we basically don't want to return HTML because this is an API. All right, we want to return a JSON string, sorry, a JSON object back as a response from our API. All right, so what I'm going to do next up is I'm going to create a new file here, and I'm going to call this file error handler.php, and I'm going to add this. All right, so within this file, first of all, we are going to, okay, let's just let that be. But within this file, we are going to set some global error handlers, basically global error handlers for 500 and for 404 requests. So for us to do that, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to call our container. So our container here, which we actually created an instance of here. And for our container, all right, our container, we're going to call this error handler. So our container object actually has an access to what is called the error handlers. There are actually a whole bunch of things we could do with this container object. If we head back into our documentation here, and I hope I can find this right now. So let me see if I can find this. Error handling, yes, error handlers. Error handlers, yes. So you can see here when we set display error as true. Yep, here we have error handler, yes. Now, you can see here now that we are actually creating an instance of our container. And with that instance of our container, we are now calling our error handler. But here is the way we are doing it post app. So we're basically just getting the container and then we are passing this in here. So whenever there's a 500 request, instead of having to show Slim's custom or Slim's default error handler, we basically just show our own custom error handler because we are building an API. All right, so we could return JSON, and even if it's a web application, we could also design our own custom 500 error page rather than use Slim's default error page. We are going to do now here is I'm going to have a function here, and our function is going to take our container, and here, right in here, we are going to return a function, and this function is going to pass our request, our response, and our exception. So just in case if there's any exception, we can throw that exception. And this is going to make use of our container. And now I'm just going to close that and get this in here, get this in here. So right within here, we are going to return whatever we want to be our custom error message, basically. So we're going to use the response, and we're going to set the status. So whenever this is a 500 status, we want to give our own custom error rather than Slim's custom error. And since this is an API, we want this to be content type of application/JSON. All right, so application /JSON. Oh my god, application /JSON. And not just the header, we also want to write our message, and our message is going to be JSON encoded. It's going to be an array, and it's going to simply be success here of false. So the reason why we're returning false is whatever request the user may have been trying to process, all right, that through this 500 error, we want to set the success to be false to tell the user that, hey, that error did not go through well. And instead of having to show the user our bad, basically maybe our system not being able to handle that request, we will just tell the user that there's an internal error here, and I just made a mistake here. Let me just call this error, right? And our error is going to be internal error. And not just internal error, lastly is we're going to also set a message here for our user, and this is going to be something went wrong with, or something went wrong internally. All right, and we are also going to set a status code, so just in case if that would be needed, and our status code is going to be 500, and we are then going to return our exception too. So our exception is going to be our stack trace, and for exception we are going to call exception, and we're going to call get trace, right, as string, and this is supposed to be this one, right? So get trace as string, and then the last thing we're going to do here is we are going to call JSON on escape slashes. So on escape slashes, and we are also going to call JSON pretty, right? JSON pretty print. Okay, so I'm going to drop a semicolon right here, sorry, and then I'm going to save this. So this is going to be our custom error handler. So basically what we're doing is, since we have access to the content of our application, we are overriding the default error handler whenever it's a 500 request. So the next we are also going to override is going to be a 404 request. All right, instead of having to show just a bare HTML string that tells the user that page is not found, we want to also return a JSON that tells the user that this is a 404 request. And for that, I'm going to just copy this whole thing right here, and I'm going to paste that in here. And for 404, it's actually called not found handler. So if you get back to the documentation, and I hope I can find this here for 404. Let me see, let's just click 404. And yep, you see it's a not found handler. All right, so 500 is error found handler, 404 is not found handler. So let's just get that in here as not found handler. And for the not found handler, we are, this is actually 404, not 500. And we are going to change our error message to be not found here. So error here is not found. Our message is endpoint was not found. And our status code here is going to be 404. Okay, so our status code is 404. And for our trace, we really don't need to keep any stack trace for this. So I'm going to save this right now. And the last one we are going to do is we are basically going to ensure that the PHP default error handler is still set. So to do that, I'm going to use the container. And for the container, I'm going to call PHP error handler. So basically, by doing this, the PHP error handler still remains present. So I'm going to call our container, and right in here, I'm going to get this here. Right in here, I'm going to return our container, and our container is going to wrap our error handler. So just in case if this is just a custom PHP error. Okay, so now that we have set this up, what I'm going to do now is within our bootstrap.php, I am going to require our error handler file. So this is just going to be error handler.php. And after setting up our error handler, the next thing we are going to set up is going to be our database. So I'm going to go into new PHP file, and here is going to be database.php. And remember, in the beginning of this video, I said we are going to be using Eloquent. So what is going to simply happen here is, first off, let's first do the first things first. I'm going to create a variable here called database config, and database config is just going to set our driver here. Of course, our driver here is MySQL. Yep. So our driver could be anything, could be Postgres, and then our host here is going to be 127.0.0.1, and then our database. We've not yet created our database basically, but I'm going to call this PHP Slim CRUD. All right, so PHP Slim CRUD, and then our username. Of course, my username is root. My password is blank, just an empty string here. And then we are also going to set the char set here. So the char set is going to be UTF-8, and for our collation is going to be UTF-8 Unicode UI, and then the last is going to be our prefix. So for our prefix, we are just going to leave that blank here. All right, so right now we have defined our database config parameters. So what we are going to do now is we are going to need to let's call this capsule. So this is going to be our illuminate. So database capsule manager. Okay, so now that we have done this, what I'm now going to do is I'm going to call a capsule add connection. So basically capsule set a database connection, and connection, and for our connection we are going to call our database config here, and then we are also going to set as global. So we are setting this config as global throughout the application, and we want to make use of Eloquent, so we are going to put Eloquent here. So capsule put Eloquent, and once we have done this, we can then return capsule. All right, so let me just be sure. We actually are supposed to create a new instance of this, since this is a class. And if I try to check this up right now, the manager, it exists. Okay, so now let's just get back into our database. And now that we have set up our database configuration, we're going to go into our bootstrap.php, and right within our bootstrap.php, we are going to require our database connection. So require once, and then let's just call this database.php. So we have set up our database.php, I've set up our error handler, and also we have set up our settings. Another thing we are going to set up also is going to be our middleware. And to set up our middleware, we're going to create another file in here, and I'm going to call this file, this is going to be a new PHP file. I'm going to call this middleware. And our middleware file is going to basically be a function. It's going to return a function that passes the app instance. For our middleware, we are going to basically add two things in here. The first is going to be our JWT middleware, and then the second is going to be our calls middleware. So basically for our JWT middleware, if you remember from the beginning of this video, we imported a package called Tupolo right here. The name of the package is Tupola Slim JWT Auth. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to call the app instance, and the app instance is going to add that package. So this is going to be the new Tupola middleware JWT Auth, and I'm going to get rid of this right now. And for our JWT authentication, all right, we're going to add a couple of things here within our settings. So the first thing we are going to set is we want to ignore certain routes. So basically, there are certain routes that we don't want this middleware to take hold of. So basically, the routes are going to be our login and our register routes. So API/login and API/register. So every other route within this application, we want this middleware to hook up around, but these two routes, this middleware should do nothing about them. And this is supposed to be within an array. All right, and for our secret, so our secret key here, we could just have anything here. So let's just see, just any random string here. All right, so let's just call this our secret key. And then for the error, so basically for one request and stuff like that, this is going to be a function, and we'll have our response and then our arguments. And right here, whenever there is a success, so if we have a success, we want to set the value as false, of course, and we don't really know what exactly our response are, because the middleware here that we are making use of just handles the response for us. Say token has expired, say there's no token found, and all that. So we can just call the message property for this argument. And the last we are going to set is going to be our status code. So our status code for us is going to be set to 401. All right, so 401. And we are then going to return a response. It's not a response object, and we want to set our headers to be content type application / JSON. So content type should be application / JSON, and the body also. So get body. Our body also, we want to write our response to our body, and our response is going to be JSON encoded array, right? Or let's not just encoded array, basically just the data, since our data is now our array. And of course we want JSON on the skip slash and JSON predefined. So JSON on the skip slashes, right? And then JSON pretty string preprint. Okay, so we have an error here. We need to put that in here for our function. And now this has set our middleware, our JWT middleware. The last the second middleware we have to set here is going to be our cause middleware. All right, so for our cause middleware, we are going to call our app, and the app, and we want to call our add method to our current middlewares. So I'm going to call a function here, and this function is going to take our request object, response, and then this is going to, our next is going to help us with forwarding. So we're going to call next. We are just going to get our response, and our next would be our request. Our next will store the value of our request and our response. All right. So basically, what we are just doing here is we are getting the and storing the value of whatever is our response, whatever the request is. All right. So we are getting the request once the request is triggered. And so next up is we're going to call our response, and we're going to set the headers here. So access control, access, right, control allow origin, and access control allow origin is going to allow for all. We're going to set again another header here, and basically this access control allow origin is just going to help with cause allowing request. All right, so if we set this to a particular URL, it's only going to allow requests from that URL, but we allow for all so that anybody can actually test this API. So the next step is going to be our access control headers, so allow headers, and our access control allow headers, we are going to allow headers from X request. Sorry guys, it's X request. Content type, we'll also set for content type too. And next up, we'll set for accept. Next up, we'll set for origin, and then authorization. All right, so these are the headers that we are allowing. All right, so we'll allow X request with content type, accept, origin, and authorization. So next up is we are going to set our allowed method. So with header, and for our allowed method, so access control allow methods. For allow methods, we are going to allow get post put patch, all right, put patch, and options, right, and of course we're also going to allow delete too. Next up, we're going to also allow access control, allow credentials. Basically this will just help with certain authorizations on the header. So access control allow credentials, and allow credentials is going to be set to true. And that's just about that for our middleware. So I'm going to save this right now. But I'm going to go into our Bootstrap, and we are going to require our middleware right now. So I'm going to require once. middleware, the PHP, and I want to keep this a variable here, middleware. And our middleware actually returns a function that takes the instance of our app here. So you can see this is returning a function that takes the instance of our app. So right in our application here, I'm going to call our middleware and pass our app into our middleware. Right, so I'm going to pass our app instance right into our middleware. And that's just about that for now. So the next thing we want to do right now is we are going to go right into our app folder. In our app folder, we're going to create a couple of folders here. So I'm going to create a controllers directory. All right, I'm also going to create a model directory, and then I'm also going to create a request directory here. And we are also going to create a response directory. And also we are going to create a validation directory here. So what I'm going to do right now is to create a class right in here within our request here. And I'm going to call this class custom request handler. All right, so this is going to be a class called custom request handler. The essence of this custom request handler is based on the fact that we want to be able to handle both GET requests and POST requests, and not just to be able to handle both GET requests and POST requests. The data that we're going to be sending from our API could come in several formats. All right, so I'm going to say public function get param. All right, so our get param is going to take our request object, is going to take a key. Basically, the last parameter is going to be a default value, which we are going to set to null. All right, so our function is going to be a static function. All right, so right in here, we are going to first of all get the post and the get the parameters whenever the requests are sent. So for post params, we are going to use the request get passed body. So this is actually a built-in function within the PHP Slim framework. And then for get param, so basically get request parameters, we are then going to call our request object and then get query params. All right, so now we have our post params and we have gotten our post params, and also we have gotten our get params. All right, but this is not just enough. I'm going to call the get body function. I'm going to create a variable here called get body, sorry, and this is going to JSON decode, all right, our request body. So whatever request body is, get body, and we just want to return true. Okay, so basically, if this is a post request and it is something that the Slim framework can pass, we just use get pass body, get request, get pass body, and get query params. But when it comes to JavaScript and JSON objects, it usually has a couple of complications with it. So all we just need to do is we just get the body of the request and then we JSON decode it. So by default, we are going to set our result here to our default value, which is null. All right, our default value, which is null. So we're going to kick off first of all by checking to see if our post param is an array, all right, and the keys are set. So basically, our post params keys are set. So sorry, our post param keys are set. We want to return our result as our post params with our keys, or with our key. Yep, with our key. All right. So else if is an object. So else if it's an object, our post params is an object. And not just that, we also want to check to see if the property exists, which is basically the keys. Then we are going to call our post params and then pass our keys here. And what we want to do is we simply want to set our result to be the value of our post params and our post params key, actually post params key. All right. And then the last of them all is going to be for our get body. So basically our get body specifically for JSON object, JavaScript object. All right, so if JavaScript object is sent from our client side. So I'm going to say else if it's an array. Of course, we have JSON decoded that, and we have actually added true here. So it has become an array by conversion. So else if get body, all right, is an array, and the keys are set. So if the keys are set, Then of course our result, what our result is going to be the keys of our body, right? Then if it's set our get params, so basically if our get params are set on the URL, so if it's set our get params with their keys, then we basically want to return our get param. So our result would be our get params, and then we're going to pass the key. And then whatever is going to be the value of our result, we are going to return that here as our result. All right, so let me just explain this one more time once again. Whenever we are dealing with get request, we use the get pass body in the Slim framework. And whenever we're dealing with the post request, we use get pass body because it's from the body, and then post request, post request because from the body we use get pass body, get request because it's from the URL we use get query params. All right. So, and also because what we also might be expecting from our client side, or the data that we're expecting from our client side down to our server may also be JSON encoded strings. All right. So we also have to use JSON decode to be able to convert it down to an array. So we just get the whole body of the request, then we decode it, and then we convert it down to an array. All right. So we just check to see if our post parameters are arrays and they have keys. Basically, if the keys are set, then we just set the value of our result set to be the value of our post parameter. And if else if is an object, our post param, and the property of that object exists, then we just map that in here. All right. But the last of them all is if it's also an array. Actually, it's our get body here, because what happens is what our application is sending down to us is actually JSON object, but JSON stringified object. So it will be reading it as a string, not as an object. If not, we would have just left. We don't have needed to add this here. With this, we are good to go. But now we are converting it to an array, and then we are just checking to see if our get body is an array and it is set. Then we want to map the value to the value of our result, and at the end of it all, we want to return the result. We just check if it is set, pass the parameters to our result, and then return our result. All right, so we have successfully succeeded in being able to set up our custom request handler, and I want to put this within a namespace so that this just becomes pretty easy for us to. So this becomes easy for us to import when we are importing our custom request handler. All right, so I'm going to save this right now and set up our validation basically. So basically, using our respect validation, we are going to write a function that will help us to get all our errors from our validation and then display all our errors all at once. All right, what I'm going to do now is right within this validation, I'm going to create a new PHP class here, and I'm going to call this validator, sorry. Okay, so we have created our validator. I'm going to click on add. So right within our validator, I'm going to give this a namespace, and our namespace is going to be app validation. We now have this class here called validator. So for our class of validator, we're going to create two variables here. So the first variable, I'm going to call it our request handler, and this is going to be protected. And then the second one is going to be our errors, right? And this should be public, right? So our errors, and this is an array. So basically what we are trying to achieve here is say, whenever the user clicks on or tries to access our endpoint, and say maybe we have like 5 different required parameters for that user, we want to display all the 5 different error messages all at the same time. All right, so to do this, we are going to call a function here, or create a function here called validate. And our validate is going to take our request object, so whatever is our request object, and then it's going to take an array of rules. All right, so an array of rules. What we are now going to do, first of all, because remember here that this is taking our request object and this is taking an array, which is actually our rules. We're going to look through all our rules. Basically, our rules are the validation that we have set that the user must pass all these requirements before he is authentic or before he is moved over to the next request. So for this, I'm going to call the for each loop, and for the for each loop, we are going to call the rules here, and our rules as a field. Let's just call this field and row. Okay, so right in here, we're going to get this within a try and a catch. And for our try here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call our rule, and then I'm going to set the name property here. So our rule set name, and for our name, I'm going to call our field, and we are going to assert, right? So assert And for our assertion here, our assertion is going to take our parameters, basically, not custom request handler, and our custom request handler get param, and our get param is going to take our request object and then our field. All right, so it's going to take whatever is our request object and then the fields that are being passed here, which are actually our rules, and it's going to return our response for us as our error message. All right, so right now I'm going to just get this in here, and for our exception, I'm going to call next validation exception. All right, so this is our exception, and just in case if there are any exceptions, we are going to call our errors, which we have defined here as an empty array that is going to be storing all our errors, and then we are going to call our field, which is what we are trying to check to see if there are any errors in them, and then we are going to call the get message ex the get message function. All right, get message function. Now that we have set up our validation function, basically we want this particular function to be able to be chained. All right, so method chaining sort of. So for us to be able to chain this, we would have to return this object here. All right, so in other words, we can call this, say, validate, or this validation validate and stuff like that. All right, guys, so we are also going to create another function here, and I'm going to call this function field. And this function is going to display the error messages, and we're going to say if it's not empty, basically. So if our errors array is not empty, then return our errors array for us. Okay, so now we have also successfully set up our validation function. Next up is going to be our route. So for our route, we're going to set up our routes within our config here. I'm going to create a new file here, and for this file I'm going to call this route. Okay, routes. All right, so for our route in here, I'm going to call our app instance, and our app instance post. So for create user or create guest, this is going to be a post request. We're going to call our guest entry controller, and then we're going to call our create guest. Okay, next up is going to be a get request, and this get request is going to be for viewing all our guests. So for viewing guests, all right, we are going to call our guest entry controller, which we have not created just yet, and our guest entry controller, and this is supposed to be single colon here, and our guest entry controller, and we are going to have a function here called view guest. Okay, next up is going to be our get request, and we are going to be dealing with just a single guest, so get single guest, and we are also going to pass down here the ID. All right, so the ID would be what we would use to notify that this is actually the guest that you have made this request to. So here is going to be our guest entry controller, and next up is going to be our get single guest. All right, our get single guest. Next up is going to be our patch here, which is going to be responsible for editing single user. So I'm going to call edit single guest, and edit single guest we'll have our ID here. All right, so I'll edit single guest, and then we'll pass our ID, and for this also we are also going to call our guest entry. All right, our guest entry controller, and we are then going to call our edit guest. After our edit guest, the next step is going to be our deleting of guests. So we're going to call our delete, and for our delete here, our delete is going to be delete. Let me just let's just add forward slash. So our next step is going to be our delete. So this is going to be delete guest. All right, so this is going to be delete guest, and then we just call our guest entry controller, and then we are going to call our delete guest. Okay, so we have set up our delete guest. Next up is going to be counting the total number of guests. All right, so this is also going to be a get request, and this is count guest, and we are going to call our guest entry controller, and this is going to be our count guest. All right, so we have successfully succeeded in being able to set up all our guest routes. So we are going to then set up our authentication routes. And for authentication routes, I want to group them in here. And I'm going to group them with a / of auth. And then we can then call a function. And our function is going to make use of our app still. So it's still going to make use of our app here. And we are going to call our app and our post event, which is a login. And we are going to call this auth controller and auth controller login. All right, so we are also going to do the same for registration. So I'm going to copy this right now. And this is going to be called register. So / register. All right, so / register. Okay, so now we have set up our login and our registration route. I'm going to save this. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to have to require our routes right within our bootstrap.php here. And let me just require once. And this is going to be our routes. Okay, so now that we have successfully set up our routes, all right, we have set up our routes. What we can now do is we're going to try to hit this endpoint, or basically hit this route and see what happens. But before we do that, we'll have to start our server here. So I'm going to head over to the public directory first. So cd public, and right within our public directory, I'm going to call php start server at localhost. Let's call localhost 888. So our application has started, and I'm going to get in here. Let's change this to 888, and now let's just send a random request. And we have an error here saying fail to open the stream, no such file or directory, which is talking about our vendor autoload. And let's just head back in there within our bootstrap for our vendor autoload right here. This is not supposed to be this way. And just move that right. Okay, so yeah, I think this is cool now. So I click on send. We have another error here on line 9, which is within our middleware.php. So let's get into our middleware.php. And now let's fix that on line 9. So we have an error here, and this is supposed to be semicolon and not commas. So I'm saving this right now, and now I'm sending another request. And you can see here that we have a success of false, an error of internal error, which is a 500 error. Now a message here saying something went wrong. And what I can do right now is I'm going to get back in here. Okay, so we missed out on this. All right. So I'm going to save this and head back here and click on send. And yep, we have success of false and a 401 as a status code, and the response is that the token is not found. Right, if I were to check this token and I clicked on send, all right, signature verification failed. Okay, so what we are now going to do is let's get back in here and let's start setting up our controllers. So I'm going to create a new controller in here, and I'm going to call this guest entry controller. And before we get into writing anything within our guest entry controller, we're going to create a file within our models here. And I'm going to call this file guest entry, not namespace, name, guest entry. All right, so we have another class here called guest entry. And we also have our controller here called guest entry controller. So for our guest entry class, because we are making use of Laravel's Eloquent, we are going to extend model. Yep, and I just want to namespace this first. So we're going to namespace, and our namespace is going to be app models, and we are then going to get this out of here first, and we're going to use this, right? And then we can now extend model. All right, so right within here, I'm going to have to, we'll create a table, and I'm going to call that table, guest entry. And I'm going to set the fillable property here, all right, the fillable property. And our fillable property is going to be the name, the email, and the last of them is going to be the comment. So now I'm going to save this right now, and we have our model. And now we are going to create our tables. We're going to create our database because right now we have not created our database. So basically our database is called CRUD app, All right, so, and I think CRUD app already exists. So let me just check right now. If I get down to my PHP, my admin, yep, CRUD app already exists. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this name to CRUD app YouTube. All right, and I'm going to create a new schema, and this is going to be CRUD app YouTube, and I'm going to create that. So I'm going to create a new table here, and this table is going to be guest entry. And let's just make this how many fields? Let's see, 5. Let me open this in a new tab. So we just have a structure. Okay, it's about 6. So the ID, which is our primary key, integer, right? Let's just give that 11. So now let's make this auto incremented, and this is our primary key. And the next field is the full name. So for the full name here, the next is the email comment created at updated at. So email. So let's just get the comment. And here we have created at. So let's click on that. And this is going to be updated at. So this is going to be various characters. This is also going to be various characters. And this is going to be date time, right? So let's just give this date time. And this too is also going to be date time. Okay, so we have our ID, our full name, our email, and then we're going to set the length for this. So let's just get this to 255, 255, 255. And now let's save this. And yep, we have our table created. All right, so we are also going to change this to CRUD app YouTube. If I have not, okay, so we've done that. So we have CRUD app YouTube here in our guest entry, which is available, which targets our guest entry table. And right within our guest entry controller, we want to namespace this. So I'm going to namespace to app controllers. So because this is within our controllers folder, right? Yes, so we have namespace that to app controllers. So